Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be talking to you all today. My name is Sydney. I was the host of the last Helena, Montana area beekeepers meeting, and I'm just going to be going over the presentation that I put together for that day if you missed it, just to give everybody a little bit more context. I don't have access to rec editing software. So I apologize in advance if this video is a little choppy or if I stumble over my words a couple times. And I appreciate all of you for being understanding and for joining me to learn a little bit more about my favorite subject. So let's jump into it. Okay, so our meeting topic the last time was about pests and pathogens within the hive that you might experience. Um, I have been a beekeeper for about 4 years in study, but 2 years in practice. So while I'm really well versed on pests and pathogens in a book sense, I'm still learning how to identify them in the hive. Um, with that being said, I've received a lot of training since I started this job, so I feel a lot more comfortable guiding and talking about this subject as I've been learning about it. Um, so you can always contact me if you have any questions about beekeeping or bee-related topics or things that you are concerned about when it comes to beekeeping, and I can always take a look at it for you and maybe guide you in the right direction to maintaining a happy and healthy stock of bees. So it is June/July, July now. We just had a big month for nectar flow. So hives should be getting fuller and taller as we add our supers on to give our bees more room. Temperatures are a little on the lower side than what they should be. So I'm anticipating that nectar flow is going to last a little longer than this year, maybe 2 weeks longer. So as we move into July and August, it's important that we know what we should be looking out for this time. And the spring and summer are great times to be aware of the pests and pathogens that could possibly be in your hives. If you were ever interested in the 5 most detrimental stressors that beekeepers have to experience in their lives, the NASS and Be Informed project has solved that issue for you. So, according to their data, the 5 principal stressors that beekeepers of all kinds experience every year are queen issues, nutritional problems, varroa, weather, and weak in fall, which is just a nice way of saying that they weren't prepared for the fall or they were like really small in terms of numbers during the fall. And if you were a commercial apiarist, then one of your primary concerns would be pesticide and pesticide poisoning. Um, so there's a level at which we can't control these factors. Bad weather comes, queens fall out of favor with age, nectar flow for a year could be early and then cut off really premature by late frost. But disease prevalence is one of the things that we as beekeepers have a lot of control over. And this comes with our ability to work and monitor our hives. Um, and it's one of the few things that can really make or break our colonies because so I want to emphasize this part. These 5 principal stressors that we deal with, 3 of them can actually be caused by varroa. Varroa can cause queen issues by infecting the queen with bad, um, sorry, she can cause issues, varroa can cause issues by causing a lot of damage to her stock by spreading diseases. They're known for spreading multiple diseases that affect their development, especially their wing development. And then affecting their wing development affects their ability to forage. So that affects nutrition. And then because of these 2 things, their immune system is going to go down, their ability to fight off infections is going to go down, their number of surviving brood is going to go down, and that is what's going to cause your bees to be weak in fall. So For this month, we're going to be managing pest, but then it's also important that we are managing the hive capacity. Like I talked about, add supers as needed, and managing swarms, because I know right now is a good chance for swarms as the nectar is about to fall out of favor. So let's talk a little bit more about the bane of every beekeeper's existence, Varroa destructor. So we're going to talk about the 5 W's with this guy: the what, where, why, who, and unfortunately the how, which I know doesn't start with a W, but it's always included. So what are Varroa? Varroa mites are an external parasite that live off of honeybee pupa. The female mite will often crawl into the bottom of the cell containing the developing larva, and begin feeding on that larva and laying eggs within the cell after it's been capped. So Varroa mites feed off the honeybee body's fat of the developing bee, which starves them by depleting any fat resources that they have in their body. But then it also exposes them to a bunch of different viral complexes, 20 of them to be in fact, many of which have to do with depleting the body's ability to develop properly, which keeps them from getting food and being able to interact with their external environment in according to the way they're supposed to. It also prevents them from growing hair, or it causes hair loss prematurely, which means that they're more likely to freeze. It causes stomach issues in them, a lot of diarrhea sometimes, which I know is gross, but is unfortunately just the reality of what these things do. So mites are spread through a lot of different means. Most of them are just regular things that bees do, like drifting, robbing, physical contact with other bees, and then commingling with other bees too. So it can happen within your hive. If you were to have a bee that went out, foraged on a flower, received a varroa mite from the flower, and then it can be transferred to the other bees within the hive, or even other bees that they meet out in the field that aren't a part of their hive. So it's something that we can't really control because we can't determine when, where, or how they get it. However, we can control the spread of it, which will help mitigate any of the issues that they're going to receive in the long term. So what do they look like? So varroa mites are pretty small in comparison to the bee. If you think about a bee in terms of the human body, like if you were a bee, a varroa mite is the size of the palm of your hand. So it's pretty small and it's very inconspicuous. Not only does it spend most of its life within the capped brood, but then trying to search for it on the body of the bee is trying to find the needle in the haystack. It's impossible. However, if you do see a bunch of mites on your active adult bees, then you probably have a problem that's worse than you even imagine. Though this is also more common in the fall, because as brood goes down, varroa will move out of the brood into the adult mites to feed off of their fat bodies instead of relying on the larva, because they're not going to be around very much longer. Let me think. What else do we got to talk about? We did the what, we did the where, we did the why, we did the how. Yes, let's go a little bit more into the idea of when. So when do mites become a big issue? So it's recommended throughout the United States that you start testing for mites between March and the end of October. This is a prime season that brood within the hive is developing. Now, mites are preferential to brood because they cannot fight back. And they also have a nice covered and conspicuous area for them to do their job and to lay their eggs, so they can multiply without being bothered by the other bees. So as brood goes up, you will often see your mite population goes up. So that's going to be primarily in the spring and the summer buildup, but as you enter the fall, it's going to go down. And like I said earlier, as brood falls, you're going to see a lot more mites that are actively on the adult bees rather than the larva, because the larva at that point will not be a reliable source of food. So they're going to move to the adults. It is important that when you are monitoring for mites that you have the mites under control at least by the end of summer. Because if you go into fall and you see that your mites are in high abundance within the population, then just know that your bees will likely not survive the winter at all, because they are just going to continue to proliferate within the hive during the winter season. The bees won't be able to protect themselves. They won't really be able to feed themselves in a sufficient way to survive, and they're just going to they're not going to succeed. And it's going to be really sad in the springtime when you go out to check your bees and find just a whole dead box of bees. So here's a couple of things that you could look for when you're trying to determine if it's a good time to check for mites. I recommend checking for mites at least 6 times a year, maybe 7 times a year, especially during the months that they're active. So that's about once or twice a month. It just depends on what you're seeing. I don't check for mites if my mites seem to be healthy, especially if they have the opposite of what I'm about to talk about, because then that's just putting the entire hive under unneeded stress. However, I will still check if I haven't checked in a month. So use your best judgment. Don't try to check for mites when the hive is really, really weak, but still always check at least once a month. So when you're looking for symptoms of Varroa infestation, here's what you're going to be looking for. You're going to be looking for weak, bald bees, oftentimes with deformed wing, because that's one of the primary and most devastating viruses that Varroa happens to carry, is deformed wing virus. So they're going to be kind of twisted, maybe in a Y shape. You can kind of see it here and here. This pace right here is extremely bad. Oftentimes they're just going to look slightly deformed, but this is like a nightmare case of Varroa here, where the pathogen load is exceeding what they can handle naturally. Um, it's kind of hard to look for these signs on your bees, especially as they're moving, but thankfully, but also sadly, with deformed wing virus, they won't be able to fly. So it will be kind of obvious that it's there. Something that you could look for in the larvae is discoloration. Oftentimes when larvae are infected, they won't have that nice pearlescent mucousy color they have. They will turn brown, gray, or yellowish instead, which sometimes the yellow is a little harder to see, but the brown and the gray are pretty evident signs of infection. And then you can also look for brood comb. Specifically, you're looking for a pattern that doesn't look healthy. So you'd be looking for shot brood. I put a brood pattern guide here at the bottom just so everybody has an idea, because I've been told multiple versions of what shot brood looks like, and I wanted to explain it to you in the best way that I knew. So if you look here at the solid brood pattern and move to more of the medium brood pattern, you can see that this is technically good, which most brood patterns do look like this, but then we have the really bad version of that where the brood pattern does not look healthy. Shot brood pattern is going to be kind of in between this area, and that's where you know that there is something going on in your hive, and you should probably check it out. Oh, before I left. So going back to the fact that it is really hard to see visually that there are mites on your bees, especially when it is not fall, I wanted to emphasize that visual inspections are just not a good way of determining whether you have high mites within your hive. These are all great for when you're looking just to kind of see how your bees are responding, especially if you know you have mites in your hive, because the more of these symptoms that you see, the worse the pathogenic load is, obviously. But I would not rely on these to determine when you should treat. I would rely on these to determine when it's time to get serious about your treatments, like vaporizing oxalic acid and treating them regularly once a week and going out and checking on them every couple of days to see how they're faring. With that being said, what is the best way to test? So the most effective means of testing for Varroa. Again, at least once or twice a month, and you are going to be doing an ethanol shake. Or you could do a sugar shake. I recommend the ethanol shake because it is much more accurate. Sugar shakes are usually about 75% accuracy, so it gives you an idea, but it doesn't give you the full picture. Um, the best way to do a ethanol shake can actually be seen here on this YouTube slide. I'm just going to very briefly describe it to you. So essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking anywhere from 100 to 300 bees. You can do it with just 100 if you notice that your bees are pretty weak. You are going to put them in a jar with the mesh on top, or you could use your Varroa Easy Test. You're going to swirl it around, shake it maybe just a little bit for about a minute, let it sit for about 30 seconds to let the mites fall, and then check the bottom of the cup, taking all the bees out to see how many mites you've actually accumulated from this test. The Varroa Easy Check makes it really easy because there's not a whole lot of fighting with your bees. You could also use a tub in the mason jar lid set up like this in order to do it, but it is a little bit more difficult and you have to touch the dead bee bodies and sort them out in order to see what's going on. So I'd always recommend getting the Varroa Easy Check. And if you do need Varroa Easy Checks, please reach out to me as I have a million of them and I will very quickly give you one. So when you have your ethanol and your bees sorted out, which I usually count the number of bees that I have just to determine my percentage, you are looking for just the number, basically. This acceptable range of control is based off of the 300 bee test, but it is easily applicable to the 100 bee test as well. So if you had 300 bees in your test and you found that there were 3 mites, you were basically on the cusp of having an issue. So you would want to control promptly just for safety, but it's also within that threshold where you wouldn't have to worry about it. But 3 or more is definitely the area where you would be worried about the safety of your bees, because if that's per 100, per 300, then that means that there are a lot more mites that you're probably not seeing that are actively in the cap brood and transmitting diseases to your bees. But like I said, do follow this YouTube link and they will show you step by step how to use your Varroa Easy Check. It is very simple, very easy, and a definite necessity if you want to make sure your bees are healthy. Now, like I said, if your bees are really weak, I understand not wanting to kill them. So you could always use a sugar shake. I wanted to express this because I know some of you have mite boards. But if you pour confectioner's sugar into your hive and expect the bees just to kind of knock it off, they will, yes. But then you also are putting things in there that may or may not have been treated, which could sometimes cause an issue to your bees. And then it could also lead to the development of molds and other funguses within your hive box if you're not careful. Which is why I always recommend using the jar and not just putting it in your hive. Though I know some people do that. I really wouldn't recommend it. You're risking the internal safety of the hive box, and that's never a good time. So now that we've talked about looking for mites, how do we treat for mites? There are a lot of different ways, as you guys probably know. Avivar is one of the most common, but there are some other things that you could do that I recommend everyone should do in order to make sure that their bees are getting exposed to a variety of treatments. And by giving them this variety of treatments, you are not only ensuring that you find something that works for you and your bees every season, but you are also decreasing the likelihood that your pest within the system, your varroa mites, are not developing resistant immunity to the treatment that you're giving them, because that has been a very big issue with Apivar as of late. Apivar works very, very well, and it's one of the only synthetic treatments that we know that works as effectively as a multi-treatment with oxalic acid and formic acid. But because of how reliable it's been in the past years, people have been only using Apivar, and as a result, Apivar is not as effective as it used to be because these mites are evolving to the point where they have a resistance to it. So here's another couple of ways that you can help your bees out. I would recommend requeening, possibly with the hygienic stock. I know people aren't a huge fan of Russians because they're on the more aggressive side, but at least you won't have to deal with mites at all. They have this really nice ability to be extra hygienic, and sometimes they can even detect the mites within the cell, like the VSH stock. The VSH stock. Ooh, sorry, I can't talk. And they can remove that bee as well as the mite from that cell, keeping your entire stock safe. But there's tons of options for that because I know that not everybody likes the Russians because they're a little bit more on the aggressive side. So I would check anything that you know has been certified as a Varroa health and hygienic stock. You could also use the classic organic chemicals like oxalic acid or formic acid. These are always great. You do just have to be aware of the certain side effects that they come with because oxalic acid can be really nasty for not only your health but your bees' health if you apply it wrong. The best way is to do it with a vaporizer, but even then, that's still pretty dangerous. Recently, I've gotten more into Varoxysan, I think that's how you say it, or Varoxysan, which is an oxalic strip, and I highly recommend that. I recently went to inspect a couple of beekeepers up in Glacier County and Thompson Falls that were using that same formulation, and they were so healthy. I didn't have a single issue with them except for a little bit of chalk brood, but he had requeened it for that reason. You could also use synthetic chemicals, again, the Apivar and Amitraz, which in the past has been reliable, but maybe not so much if you've been treating with those for the past couple of years. Switching it up will definitely help out with breaking that resistance over time. But you could also use non-chemical aids if you're a little bit afraid of them, though I do trust every single chemical that I've ever used when it comes to treating for bees. However, I do highly recommend the bee gym. The bee gym is a really helpful tool that you can just add to the top of your frames. You put it over the brood chamber, and as the nurse bees are going about, or even some of the forager bees to go and put in the food per cell, they will use those holes that are in the bee gym, and they'll use it to knock off mites and clean themselves up from their travel outside. And then those mites will drop to the bottom of the board, which if you have a mite board, then they get stuck. Which again, the mesh mite board was the next part. I've also heard that you can use a sticky label paper, like the ones that you get for label making or sending out mail from UPS, and you could put that at the bottom of your mite board, and that will capture all of the mites, but won't impact any of your bees because it's sticky enough to hold down the mites, but it's not sticky enough to hinder your bees' ability to move, which I thought was really interesting. I haven't tried that yet, but I got that information from a very trusted source, so I I'd say it's pretty legitimate. So just the final thoughts that I had about this conversation. I know that everybody beats to death the idea of varroa mites, and I will continue to beat to death the varroa mites because I believe that they are one of the most important things that we as beekeepers can take care of in order to ensure not only that our hives are healthy, but that our neighbors' hives are healthy and that the rest of the pollinators around us stay healthy. Because what a lot of people forget um, is that bees can fly a very long distance, especially if they are food stressed. Most people say that they can fly 3 to 5, but there are some papers that indicate that they can fly up to 10 miles searching for food. So that is 10 miles that they have to interact with other bees, your neighbor's bees, and also the local native bees that can, in fact, catch their viruses, especially if they are part of the Apis family. So bumblebees, minor bees, things like that, they can become infected with varroa mites and they can catch other diseases that could be harbored by an infected colony with a high mite load. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that because I don't think it's talked about a lot. Um, so again, you're not a bad beekeeper if you have varroa, but you are a bad beekeeper if you let your varroa persist to unsafe levels for your colony. So do just be aware of what's going on in your hive and make sure you take care of them because your success and your neighbor's success and everybody else's success, unfortunately, also relies on you and your ability to take care of your bees. And I think that's all I really had to talk about. If anybody has any questions about what I just talked about or anything that I could follow up on, any specific issues, please just send me an email and I will try to get back to you as fast as I can with good resources. Um, Speaking of which, if you didn't come to the meeting, I did hand out a page of resources that I will send along with this video. This one is just a colony stressor rating. It shows you the different things that you should be watching out for and their level of significance to your hive. And then on the back of that, it's going to have a link to the Honeybee Health Coalition, which has a lot of great resources for taking care of your hives and trying to manage your varroa mite situation. So I go there anytime that I have a situation that I am unsure about how to handle, and it's very clear and very easy to maneuver with. So I'll be sure to attach that to this video. Um, and again, I really appreciate you guys hanging in there with me, even though I know I stuttered quite a lot. But talking to you all about this is really important, so I'm happy to do it anytime. Uh, Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you all at our next meeting.